Welcome to the City Club. My name's Randy Nemitz. I'm the Director of Global Business Development for Magnet and also a board member of the Northern Ohio International Business Network, which are both the sponsors for our speaker today. I'm also a fourth-generation manufacturing person. Probably a lot of people didn't know that, but my great-grandfather was a industrial blacksmith. My grandfathers were machinists and welders. My dad was an engineer, and now I'm an ag chem. And now I'm at Magnet. So history-wise, my goal is to make sure that manufacturing stays strong in this region. So I have manufacturing in my blood. The other thing that really is important to me is that this region maximizes and really expands its ability to innovate its manufacturing base, keep it, and move it forward. And that's one of the key reasons why I've asked Dan to come here today. Clearly, never in my lifetime have I've seen the really unrest in the Mideast that everyone has seen over the news in the last couple of years. Nor have I seen issues that we face, like we face today in Japan, where we have workers that are going into a situation that are clearly a lifetime experience in a very short period of their life. And never during regional times have I seen this region face some of the really struggles that it's faced. Nor have I seen some of the issues that our schools are facing. Are we really ready to exceed those challenges that are made and required of us to innovate again and again in our schools, in our industry, and our manufacturers? And today at the City Club, hopefully Dan can give us his insight, while all of us have their point of view. His is one that I found unique in the past and really appreciate him coming out for. So I would like to introduce Mr. Dan Griswold. He is the Director of Trade Studies at the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C., and the author of The Mad About Trade, Why Main Street America Should Embrace Globalization. Commercial, you can pick this up on your way out and Dan will autograph it for you. You can give him money, but you don't have to. So please take one for your organization. I believe we have enough, but maybe we're one or two short. If so, let me know and we'll get that taken care of. Magnet people, you can't have any. He's written articles for major newspapers, appeared on CNBC, C-SPAN, CNN, PBS, Fox News, testified before the House and the Senate on various issues. And he is also the editor-past of the daily newspaper, the Colorado Spring Gazette. I'm not familiar with that one, but it sounds nice in Colorado. He holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. The Buckeye pin is an indication that while he is in the Big Ten, we do appreciate his coming to the organization and speaking on his behalf. And also holds an outstanding diploma in economics and a master's degree in politics of the world from the esteemed London School of Economics. And I'd like to introduce Dan Griswold. Welcome to the City Club.
Well, Randy, thank you very much. I want to thank Randy and Magnet for inviting me here. Randy and I crossed paths at the District Export Council Conference in Detroit last fall. I want to thank the International Business Network and the Historic City Club for having me here. I'm embarrassed to admit this is my first visit to the great American city of Cleveland. And I have enjoyed it very much. I hope it's not my last visit. I'm going to bring my teenage sons back here to go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Now it's on record, they'll hold me to it. The Cato Institute is a nonprofit educational institution. We're nonpartisan. We have a good reputation in Washington for dishing it out pretty equally to politicians from both parties. Just to show our nonpartisan credentials, our most popular publication is a Declaration of Independence and a U.S. Constitution and an opening essay by one of our constitutional scholars. And one of the biggest fans of the Cato Constitution is Dennis Kucinich. He is constantly waving it and says he tells us he loves it. Your region, in a lot of people's eyes, is a symbol of industrial decline. Now, I know that's not true, but this is a region where there are a lot of skeptics of trade. And people see factories that have closed down and they're mad about trade, not in the way I necessarily advocate in my book. And today I want to challenge some of those assumptions of people who criticize trade and globalization and hold it responsible for some of the challenges of northeastern Ohio. And I want to tackle the meat and potatoes of the trade issues: exports, imports, jobs and living standards, and the future of U.S. Manufacturing. The purpose of writing Mad About Trade was to kind of meet the populace on their own turf. I consider it a scholarly book with attitude. I want to talk in language that people are hearing on talk radio, they hear on cable TV every night. The facts are there, they just need to be presented in a way that people can understand. First, something we can all agree on: our nation is a lot more globalized than it was 30 years ago when I was getting out of college. I open the book in a kind of an unusual way. I give people a tour of my closet. I open up my closet and I inventory everything that was hanging in there. I didn't find any skeletons hanging in there. A good scandal or two might have helped book sales, but I did find, I guess, a scandal of sorts, and that is how few items in my closet are made in the USA. Out of 120 clothing items, from shirts and shoes to trousers, exactly 10 were made in the USA, and 9 of those were neckties. You go through the rest of my house, and the appliances, the kitchen appliances and laptop computers and basketballs and everything were made overseas, most of them in China. Now, before anybody questions my patriotism, I urge you all to do your own inventory sometime and see where the stuff in your house is made, and you'll find a lot of it's made overseas. And this is reflected in our broader trade statistics. Since the 1960s, the share of exports as a share of the U.S. economy have tripled. Imports have almost quadrupled. I don't think ever in American history have we earned or spent a higher share of our income in the global economy than we do today. Now, nobody complains about the export side of the equation, right? Everybody loves exports, and I love exports. And after a long winter of trade flows and trade policy, we're seeing some thawing in Washington. Exports have been a bright spot of the U.S. economy as we come out of this recession. In the latest Commerce Department report on trade, the monthly trade report, exports have now surpassed their previous high. We have never exported more to the world than we're doing now. On trade policy, President Obama, after not being very enthusiastic about trade, seems to be warming up to the possibilities. He launched his National Export Initiative last year, and that is his ambitious goal, I think overly ambitious and unrealistic, to double U.S. exports over the next 5 years, but I think he's at least pointing us in the right direction. We have the Korea, the Colombia, and the Panama trade agreements coming up this year, and I think the chances are we'll get those passed. They will open the door to another $11 billion in U.S. exports. It looks like we've resolved our dispute over cross-border trucking with Mexico, which will repeal sanctions on $2.4 billion of U.S. exports to Mexico. The future of the Cleveland area, Ohio, and the nation is tied up in our ability to do business in the global marketplace. 75% of the world's spending power is outside the United States. Last year we passed a milestone. We now export more to people in emerging markets than we do to people in other rich countries like our own, and something like 80% of export growth, 70-80% of export growth is going to be in those emerging markets. You all know the story. General Motors is selling twice as many Buicks in China as they do here in the U.S. As this global middle class grows, and estimates are the global middle class in emerging economies is going to be 2 billion, 1.4 to 2 billion people by 2030. That means they're better customers, they're better suppliers, they're better business partners, and more of them out there. And their appetite for U.S. goods and services is just going to grow. We're talking more airliners, beef, poultry, computers, pharmaceuticals, medical equipment, insurance, higher education. America and the people of Northern Ohio are well positioned to sell into those markets. In fact, one recent study found that the gross metropolitan product of Cleveland, 13% of it depends on exports. It's even higher in Youngstown, Ohio, and that's higher than the national average of 11%. So your region of the country is somewhat more globalized than average. According to the Ohio Department of Development, 362,000 people in Ohio have jobs that are directly connected to exporting to the rest of the world. And as many of you know, half of those exports go to our NAFTA partners, predominantly Canada, but also Mexico. And does anybody know where what the number 3 market is for exports from Ohio? It's China. And it's one of the few markets that really is doubling over a 5-year period. China is now the number 1 market for U.S. agricultural exports. They love our soybeans. We sold $10 billion worth of soybeans, and Ohio is a leading soybean producer. Just remember all that the next time you hear a politician trashing NAFTA or imports from China. And this is not just a Fortune 500 phenomenon. Small and medium-sized companies more and more are exporting to the rest of the world. Here in Ohio, there are over 13,000 companies, many of them right in your metropolitan area here, who are selling in markets, some of them just to Canada or Mexico, but others in China and elsewhere. Nationally, 89% of companies exporting are small and medium-sized enterprises. And here in Ohio, they account for 1/4 of your state's exports. Well, it's a little harder sell on imports, but I argue in the book and every chance I get that imports are at least as important and beneficial as exports to Americans. This is totally forgotten by our politicians in Washington, but trade and imports in particular are a working family's best friend. They deliver lower prices, more variety, and better quality to American consumers, and in particular, middle and low-income families who spend a higher share of their budget on the kind of products that are particularly traded in global markets. Agricultural products, clothing, shoes. Think of free trade as the market's antitrust policy, keeping companies honest. It forces them to work hard to offer better products at more affordable prices. You know, you think of the things that are traded internationally, like consumer electronics, toys, clothing, even new automobiles. Those are the products where prices have tended to go up less than inflation, or in many cases, even to go down. And this translates into more spending power and higher real wages. Whereas those goods and services that don't tend to be exposed to international competition, like healthcare, college tuition, cable TV rates, movie tickets, those prices have gone up faster than inflation, in many cases much faster than inflation. And then, of course, product variety. Because of the variety from imports, we're more likely to get the shirt, the blouse, the car that we want. And this translates into real welfare gains for consumers. One study I quote from the University of Chicago says a typical American family of 4 is better off by $5,000 a year because of the variety brought by imports. I sometimes wish every time you went shopping at a grocery store or a big box retailer, at the bottom it says, you have saved X dollars because of international import competition. I think that would help people. Now, of course, the flip side is protectionism is an enemy of working families, and particularly the poor. Our highest remaining trade barriers in America, and we have some, are aimed at products made and grown by poor people abroad and disproportionately consumed by poor people at home. I'm talking about those staple goods, food, clothing, shoes. The $26 billion that we raise from tariffs, and that's getting to be a rounding error in Washington, but that is the most regressive tax that our federal government imposes. Those people who are defending holding on to those trade barriers are really defending policies that are picking the pockets of the poorest Americans. And those of us who favor trade agreements and want to get rid of those trade barriers, we're really in favor of tax cuts for the poor. And of course, the imports just aren't for consumers. In fact, over half of what we import to the United States each year are imported by businesses in northern Ohio and across the country who are importing raw materials, intermediate inputs, capital machinery to help them be more productive in the domestic economy and the global economy. When we hold on to trade barriers against steel through anti-dumping orders, against sugar through our quota system, we're driving up costs for a broad swath of U.S. industry. You go to Chicago, and the confectionery industry has been decimated around Chicago because of artificially high domestic sugar prices. And those factories have gone to, low-wage, low-standard countries like Canada, where they can import sugar at global prices. So this is a producer issue as well. We need to pursue a holistic trade policy that doesn't just talk about the benefits of exports, but the benefits of imports. I'm waiting for the president to launch his national import initiative. Let me know if he does. Now, of course, I can see the questions right now, and you hear it on the floor of Congress. What good do lower prices do you if you don't have a job? And we have 9% unemployment out there right now. Well, a central message that I bring today is trade is not about more jobs or fewer jobs. It's about better jobs. There's no statistical, historical correlation between rising trade and higher unemployment or lower unemployment. What trade does is it allows us to trade up to those industries, those occupations where we have more of an advantage in the global economy. The overall unemployment rate's determined by deeper factors: monetary policy, the business cycle, labor market, flexibility. But what trade means is we can do more of what we're better at. Of course, the flip side is we do less of what we're not as good at, so it means we're going to be importing more and making fewer shirts and T-shirts and plastic balls and things like that. People do lose their jobs because of trade, and you don't have to go very far in northeastern Ohio to find them. It's a fact of life. The best estimates are maybe 400,000 to 500,000 people a year lose their jobs because of trade, but you have to put this in the context of a dynamic U.S. economy that is creating and destroying millions of jobs every year. My calculations are trade is responsible for about 3% of overall job displacement every year. Another way of looking at it is for every one person standing in the unemployment line because of trade, imports, outsourcing, there are 30 people directly in front of that person who've lost their jobs for reasons that have nothing to do with trade. Technology is the big job displacer, internal market competition, changing consumer tastes. Right in my neighborhood in Northern Virginia, we have a Blockbusters and a Borders that are going out of business. Got nothing to do with international trade. It has to do with Netflix and Amazon.com. I'm a refugee of the daily newspaper business. I had a hunch in the 90s I wasn't going to earn my living at a daily newspaper till I retired. It's got nothing to do with trade. It's Craigslist, the internet. Here's a real job killer. Digital camera. Not too far from here in Rochester, New York, 30,000 workers at Kodak have lost their jobs because of digital cameras and plunging film sales, not because of imports. We should feel empathy for every person in that unemployment line. But there's no reason why we should demonize trade as some unique or even majority source of job displacement. We should think about trade the way we think about technology. The internet, digital cameras, e-readers, they create economic opportunities and profit opportunities for U.S. companies. They make our lives better every day. They raise our overall standard of living, while they do cause some dislocation. But what do we do with technology? We let it go ahead and we make adjustments to it. And I'm saying let's do the same with trade. It is one of the big lies of the trade debate that we are giving up high-paying manufacturing jobs and replacing them with low-paying service jobs, flipping hamburgers, cashiering at a Walmart. We are creating those jobs. But the real story over the last 20 years, and you have to look at a broad perspective, we're coming out of a recession, but over the last 20 years is the majority of the net new jobs that we've created in this country, 2/3 of them, in fact, have been in generally service sectors where the average pay is actually higher than manufacturing. We are a middle-class service economy today, and we shouldn't apologize about that. And what I've learned about Cleveland in my short time here, you can see it happening here. Yes, you're losing manufacturing jobs, but you've got the wonderful hospital complex, the Cleveland Clinic, and the university hospitals. You've got other sectors that are growing and replacing it. We're talking about just go and knock on doors of a middle-class neighborhood in Northeast Ohio or across the country and ask people where they work, and you'll find overwhelmingly they work in the service sector. The middle class, the American middle class today earns its keep in the service sector. The road has been bumpy, but American workers and families have been moving up in our more globalized era. Well, let me say a few words about manufacturing. I know this is one of the nation's primary manufacturing areas. This has been the bread and butter of northeastern Ohio. The basic story about manufacturing is we are producing more and better stuff with fewer workers. I go on talk radio quite a bit. You could say it's one of the occupational hazards of my job, but it's an important part of what I do. And one of the questions or the refrains I hear over and over again is we just don't make anything anymore. Some of you may have seen ABC News had a special a week ago on Made in America, and the underlying theme was we just don't make things anymore. Well, first, if you stand back and you look at the broader numbers, we remain the world's #1 manufacturing power. When you look at manufacturing value added, the value we add in this country minus imported components, we remain #1. China's going to catch us in a decade or so, but we're #1 right now. U.S. manufacturing output, real output, is 50% higher than it was 20 years ago before NAFTA even came into effect. We're getting close to our pre-recession peak. I've got an Economist magazine here, a story in the recent Economist. Rust Belt recovery. Against all odds, American factories are coming back to life. Thank the rest of the world for that. I think they've got it right. You know, just in the past year, thanks to largely the exports, but also a slowly recovering U.S. economy, manufacturing has actually been leading, a leading sector of this recovery. Manufacturing output is up 10% over the last year. Manufacturing employment is up 189,000 from a year ago. Trade has allowed us to move up the value chain. We're producing fewer of some things, but more of others. I think part of the problem is the stuff we import ends up in Dan Griswold's closet that I can talk about. The stuff we export to the rest of the world and we make and export doesn't tend to be stuff we have in our living rooms. Here's an inventory of what we made in 2008. And many of this stuff right here in Ohio. 5,000 civil aircraft, 14,000 civil aircraft engines, 8.7 million motor vehicles, 27 million computers, 44 million heavy household appliances. Check where your washing machine or your dishwasher was made. 90 million metric tons of steel. That sounds like a lot to me. That's quite a bit. 25 million short tons of chlorine gas. More than 1 billion square yards of rugs and carpeting. A billion gallons of paint. Billions and billions and billions of semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, books. Mad About Trade is a manufactured product made in the USA. That's a lot of stuff. It's just stuff that doesn't end up in your living room, so you don't think about it. It's business to business kind of manufacturing. And of course, and I've heard stories, SageLock and companies like that in your region that are going gangbusters in the global economy, and we need to think and talk about that. And here's where the politics comes in. We can produce all that stuff with fewer workers because they're so much more productive. And of course, if you're a union organizer, you don't collect dues from a ton of steel, you collect dues from a union worker. And you don't take that much comfort that you're producing more with less. In fact, look at the steel industry for a minute. If you went back to 1980, it took 10 man-hours to produce a ton of steel. By 1990, that was down to 4 man-hours to produce a ton of steel. Today, it's down to 2 hours, 2 man-hours to produce a ton of steel, and with some producers, mini mills and others, you can produce a ton of steel with 1 man-hour. Well, our steel production, except for the recent recession, was a pretty steady 90 million tons of steel a year. Well, if your production is staying at a fairly high level of 90 million, and yet it takes 1/5 the man-hours to produce a ton of steel, what's going to happen to employment? It's going to go down. But I think the real issue is how much we're producing. We remain a strong manufacturing nation. I'll just make a couple of other points, and then I look forward to your questions. A lot of complaints about the trade deficit. I think the way to think about the trade deficit is the flip side is foreign investment coming in. And this is another success story of globalization. If the foreigners aren't using those dollars they earn in our economy to buy soybeans and valves from Ohio, they're investing. They're maybe buying treasury bonds, which help keep long-term interest rates down, or they're investing directly in foreign direct investment here in the United States. There are over 5 million Americans that work for foreign-owned affiliates. These jobs pay a third more than average. Here in Ohio, you've got over 200,000 people working for foreign-owned affiliates, over half of them in manufacturing. I understand Bridgestone has a technical center down in Akron that they just launched. They're investing $100 million there. Think about that the next time a politician complains about the trade deficit. Well, let me just conclude. I don't want anybody to go away here with a misunderstanding. I don't have any easy answers for the very real problems that are confronting all of you as you wrestle with the future of Cleveland and Northeast Ohio. But I know the critics of trade don't have easy answers either. It's funny, about 3 years ago, right at this time of the year, I think less than a mile from here, there was another discussion of trade going on. It was then Senators Obama and Clinton duking it out over who opposed NAFTA more. Do you remember that debate? And they got into that rhetorical race to the bottom. Here's what our future president said that night at Cleveland State University. If you travel through Youngstown and you travel through communities in my home state of Illinois, you will see entire cities that have been devastated as a consequence of trade agreements. Well, first, I just challenge the accuracy of that statement. You have communities that have gone through difficult times. I don't think it's a problem of trade agreements. But then he went on there to actually threaten to withdraw from NAFTA if the Canadians and the Mexicans didn't agree to renegotiate. Now, it's actually a good thing that politicians break their campaign promises sometimes, isn't it? Especially when they're very unwise promises. But, Youngstown comes up a lot, and I know it's not far from here. I understand the people of Youngstown and the Mahoning Valley still talk about a particular date as Black Monday, when things really seem to kind of turn in a negative direction. On that September day, Youngstown Sheet and Tube announced that it was laying off 4,000 workers. Maybe this is what the president was thinking of, I guess. Within 3 years, another 9,000 jobs would be gone. Can anybody tell me what year Black Monday was? 1977. That was more than 16 years. You get a star. That was more than 16 years before NAFTA went into effect. Friends, it is a cruel hoax to tell people that if we can just withdraw from NAFTA or defeat the next trade agreement, there's going to be some sort of industrial renaissance and all those good middle-class union jobs are going to come back. It is not that simple. I think what you find is the problems are deeper, the solutions are more challenging than some throwaway soundbite at a debate. There are very real problems, and I'm not going to get into the details. It's a speech for another day, but we're talking about education reform. We're talking about getting a handle on spending and the debt, bringing some sense to our tax system. Those are the things we should be talking about, and not blaming 17-year-old trade agreements or all those imports from China that poor and middle-class Americans are buying. After writing Mad About Trade, I am more convinced than ever that trade and globalization they're not just a fact, but they are profoundly beneficial to the large majority of Main Street Americans in Cleveland, in central Minnesota, where I grew up, across this great country. Expanding trade is not the problem. It is part of the answer. It is part of the agenda of this country and this region to create better jobs and sustainable growth. And here I'll give my little pitch. I spent 2 years working on Capitol Hill. Believe me, they hear from the squeaky wheels. Those companies that don't like competing against foreign competition. People who are overdosing on talk radio and some of the misunderstandings being pervade there. They need to hear from any and all of you in this room who share my belief that expanding trade, foreign investment are an important and beneficial part of the future of this region. A lot of people today are mad about trade. Mad as in angry. I think we should be mad as in crazy about the wonderful opportunities that our new and more open world are creating before us every day. Thank you very much.
Now we'd like to return our speaker to the traditional City Club questioning. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests, again. Holding the microphones today in the City Club are Director Carrie Miller and also Development Assistant Lucille Barbati. And we will start with the first question. Please wait till they recognize you from the audience. Raise your hands. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Griswold, and thank you for your comments.
You're welcome.
I think anybody who would disagree with your statements about vigorous trade relationships with the rest of the world is living in the past. And I think trade is probably the one successful, sustainable effort that we can do in order to grow our economy. So I think we agree on those points. But on Monday, I attended a forum at Ohio State with Senator Brown and 50 small and medium business folks from around Ohio here. And what I heard time and time again was their efforts about entrepreneurship, about investment, and many other aspects about trying to grow their businesses had barriers to trade. And those barriers were currency manipulation that was done by many countries, and they named China and India, for example, high tariffs from countries like Brazil, where they couldn't get our products here made in the U.S. through. So don't we agree also that trade needs to be fair and that our partners need to treat us on the same level that we treat them? And I guess sort of in closing, some of our barriers that are set up here in the United States, I think, are in reaction to some of those barriers that we have from other countries. And also I'd like to say to you that one of your statistics is incorrect. Last year, we only made about 45 million short tons of steel in this country. We historically and traditionally make about 90 to 100 million tons. And here in Cleveland, we make it at 1.1 man-hour per ton. Oh, I'm sorry. And my question, sir, is what should we do from a macro sense about currency manipulation, other trade barriers, and the kinds of issues that other countries place on us in order for us to be fair trading partners?
Yes. Well, thank you very much for those observations. Just a point of fact. Pardon me for not being clear, but I did try to specify that that number of tons of steel did dip during the recession. But if you go back 2008 and back, it's remarkably stable at 90. But it's dipped, and hopefully it's coming back. And I congratulate you on your productivity. That's wonderful. Yeah, fair trade. You know, my antennas start to quiver with the term fair trade because it's so malleable. It means different things to different people. You know, the economist in me says if other countries hold on to high trade barriers, they pay a price for that. Their producers pay higher prices for the goods coming in. Their consumers pay a higher price. Their growth is less and their productivity is less than it could be. If other countries are engaging in bad economic policies, we shouldn't copy their policies. We should follow the policies that are best for us. And I think free trade is the right policy for America. What else other countries do? The issue of currency manipulation, it's a complicated one. That's kind of a loaded term. I think everybody thinks of China when you hear it. You know, pegging your exchange rate isn't necessarily a bad thing. We did it for a number of decades through the Bretton Woods system. That system eventually broke down in the 1970s. About half the world's countries, mostly less developed countries, manage their exchange rates to one degree or another, either tying it directly to the U.S. currency or managing it. Now let's not forget China, for all its progress, in many ways remains a much less developed country, including its capital and financial sector. So they have some justifiable reasons for not having a completely floating currency. I think currencies tend to get exaggerated in their effect on trade. There are other compensations that go along with exchange rates. I think the U.S. dollar has depreciated significantly against some other currencies like the Canadian dollar and the euro, and yet our bilateral trade deficits with those countries have continued to go up. So if you're looking for some kind of magic bullet where the renminbi appreciates a certain amount and our trade deficit with them falls in half and you get that industrial renaissance, it just ain't going to happen. And one other thing, the renminbi has been moving. The Chinese are moving in the right direction. They're reforming their currency system. They see that it's in their interest to have a more flexible, market-driven currency. Since 2005, the renminbi has appreciated about 25% in nominal terms. The other thing going on, though, is prices are going up in China. Their inflation rate is higher than ours. Wages are going up there significantly. And then you get into something, the real exchange rate. And that's actually appreciated about 50% since 2005. Now, Senator Schumer and Senator Graham and others, I know it's my job to pay attention to these things. 2005, they were saying the Chinese currency is undervalued by 15 to 40%. Therefore, we're going to split the difference and impose a 27.5% tariff on Chinese goods. Well, they've done more. The renminbi's done more than make up for that alleged depreciation. So I'm not excusing everything the Chinese do. They need to move. They need to move more quickly than they have towards a more convertible currency. I feel the pain of people trying to sell in markets where they aren't as open as ours. But I think the solution is, here's one last plug I'll put in. So I'll bring a close my long-winded answer to your thoughtful question. This is where trade agreements come in. You know, our trade agreement with South Korea, with Colombia and Panama, other countries do tend to have higher trade barriers than we do. That's why we're generally more prosperous and richer than other countries. When we sign these trade agreements, we get the level playing field that Sherrod Brown and other people are saying they always want. These agreements are going to get their tariffs on our products down to zero. Our products are going to go down to zero. Their tariffs go down more than ours. That's why we need a comprehensive round in the Doha round. So I think it's a consistent message. I understand your problem that you've outlined. It's real. I'm just saying here's a positive, pro-trade way to address it. Thank you.
Mr. Griswold, thank you for coming today to Cleveland. Appreciate your comments. My question is, the effects, both beneficial and adverse, of trade are not shared equally by everyone. This region has shared more of the more adverse effects. So as an economist, what do you think we can do about regions such as ours who suffer these effects and those who have been displaced?
Yes, yeah. I think that's a very real problem, and people like me need to address that. And if I didn't do enough in my talk, my apologies. I do give it some passing thoughts in the book. You know, it's asking a lot of a policy, not just to be good for America overall, but to kind of be good for everybody in equal measure. Again, go back to technology. Can you say the internet and iPods and Amazon have been good for all Americans equally? No. I mean, they've put people out of work. And yet we all see that it's good. Here's the challenge. I think we need to design policies that help Americans make that transition. And there's some people where there's no easy answers. The 55-year-old steelworker who's retired, he's not going to become a computer programmer. I know that. And maybe there just needs to be a program where there's some kind of early retirement or something like that. But think of those 30 people in the unemployment line ahead of the person who's lost their job. Why are they any less deserving of our attention than that one person who's lost their job because of trade. We have trade adjustment assistance, which, by the way, I think hasn't been a very effective program and is probably a waste of money. But let's think about first designing an education system, K through 12, community college, that educates people for the jobs being created today and tomorrow. Let's improve those, and they have plenty of room for improvement, particularly on the K through 12 level. And then let's design unemployment, insurance, job retraining programs so that they apply to all Americans equally who are transitioning from one line of work to another. So again, no easy answers, but I think we have to have the fundamental philosophical disposition that trade, technology, these are positive changes going on. Let's make the adjustments. Let's equip ourselves to embrace the opportunities of the future, not through artificial means. You know, to me, trade barriers to hold on to jobs makes about as much sense as banning digital cameras to hold on to those middle-class jobs at Kodak. No, we need to train ourselves for the jobs of the future and design policies to help people make that transition and to cushion the transition.
I appreciate your comments and the way you laid out, I think in a really clear fashion, you know, where we really stand in that area. I do a lot of work in the advanced energy sector. We're trying in the region to grow that sector to generate economic impact. And as you know, in that sector, incentives, public sector incentives play a big role in creating the market demand. And there's a lot of debate about, you know, local content restrictions when you take public money to fund projects and activities, because, you know, we're sharing that we should, on the one side, we should benefit most from that, but then it is a trade barrier. So I'm interested in your thoughts, especially in this energy sector where there's public money involved, and how you see policy developing, and, you know, what side of that equation are you on? What side of that coin are you on?
Well, first, for the record, I'm against public subsidies of alternative energy. It's not my area, but you can visit the Cato website, www.cato.org, and find lots of good stuff about energy policy, alternative energy. So right there, I'm skeptical of public money in that area. And secondly, if we are spending public money, and of course defense is something everybody can agree on, it's right there in the Constitution, that little pocket Constitution that Dennis Kucinich waves. That's a legitimate function of government. There I'm against Buy American provisions. What the Buy American provisions really mean is that we're either going to spend more than we have to get a particular product for the government, or we're going to get less product for the money we spend. And I think with defense, that's unconscionable. We should get the best equipment possible for our soldiers and be faithful to taxpayers in stewards of their money, and be faithful to our men and women in uniform and get the best possible equipment for them when we send them into battle. And then, of course, there's a very practical effect that if we embrace Buy American, those will be less dollars flowing overseas, less dollars to come back to invest in Ohio and buy our products. And we're going to get other governments, we're going to set a bad example for other governments, and what's going to prevent Buy Canadian, Buy European, Buy Chinese. And then where's our moral standing to have them be open to our world-class suppliers bidding for their government contracts. And by the way, that is another benefit of these trade agreements. They often have government procurement provisions. We've signed on to a multilateral one through the WTO. These bilateral ones that we sign, that's one of the arguments for the Panama Agreement. U.S. companies will have a better shot at the $5 billion that's being spent to expand the canal. So I say Buy American when it makes sense, but otherwise import, and then they'll buy more from us.
Mr. Griswold, first off, thanks for all your shout-outs to the City of Youngstown. I'm with the Youngstown-Warren Regional Chamber of Commerce. And
that's why you knew the date.
Well, more than that, my dad was one of the 4,000 that was laid off on that day. And he still doesn't believe I'm actually an offspring of his. He thinks I'm a Rockefeller baby switched at birth. That's a different story. But I do want to say a couple things. Youngstown definitely has had its share of the problems over the decade, some of it self-inflicted. But last year in 2010, we had $775 million in new projects announced. 83% of those projects had foreign ownership: French, Russian, Taiwanese, and Dutch. And just to talk about globalization. So I just wanted to bring up that point, and I wanted to bring up one other point. I'm sorry, I don't have a question. Just north of Youngstown and on the way to Cleveland is a General Motors plant called Lordstown. At that plant, they've made a new car this year called the Chevy Cruze, which dealers can't keep on the lot. The Department of Commerce actually came out and said that car is not American-made technically because only 45% of that content is domestically manufactured. The Chevy Cruze is a global car made in 7 different plants throughout the world by General Motors. Its predecessor at Lordstown, the Chevy Cobalt, was only made for the North American market. And you could see how the critics have reviewed the Cruze and say it's infinitely better. It's a world-class type of sedan. And 400 people were relocated from other displaced GM plants to the Youngstown area because of the Cruze going to 3 shifts. So I think there is something to be said that the city of Youngstown and Warren is embracing globalization because they see it firsthand. So thank you for your comments.
That's a great story, and thank you very much. You told it better than I could. I'll just say it just makes you realize that they call it trade for a reason. You have to give up something of value to get something of value, and when we import things, that money comes back to be spent. They acquire those dollars for a reason, and if they're not buying our goods and services, they're investing. And if we make it harder for foreigners to sell into our market, there's going to be less trade overall. There's going to be less dollars coming back to buy the soybeans and the products from Ohio and investing in those plants, which have state-of-the-art jobs, state-of-the-art technology. They're some of the best jobs around. So, wonderful example. Thank you.
Again, I congratulate you on your comments and your insightful remarks. What I hear is, especially from my colleagues from the steelworkers, these kind of meetings that you had in Columbus, the discussions here today, are taking place all across the United States. In the last year, identical meetings in Stockton, California, Savannah, Boston, Portland, Maine, Houston, Texas. And I really want to talk now about export initiatives. We have the platitudes from Washington, and that's what they are, versus the what I'll call town hall meetings of concerned, involved practitioners involved in international trade. There's a disconnect. There isn't an ombudsman office that says, let's address these issues, whether they're intellectual property protection or patents or monetary issues. What can you do to someone like our Senator Rob Portman and say, introduce this legislation so we can create this? Not a new bureaucracy, ferret out something in commerce and focus on ombudsman. I'd like to hear your comment.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. In a way, Cato plays that role. You know, I said one of my burdens in tackling this project was to bridge that gap. You're right. There's the platitudes. There's the stuff coming out from academia, which is solid, but it's aimed at other academics. And then this street-level, Main Street debate going on at these town hall meetings. And what I've tried to do today and in my work at Cato is bridge those and give some talking points. You know, Cato's, we're not a lobbying shop. We're a 501c3 educational institution, so it's not my job. I'd get Cato in trouble if I went up to Senator Portman's office and said, how about sponsoring this legislation? But we can propose ideas. I do think, I guess here's what I'd say. I think our elected officials have a responsibility to talk in a constructive way about trade. It's an easy issue to demagogue. And I think it starts at the very top with the president. And I'm not going to beat up on President Obama. He's been doing some constructive things on trade after a very slow start, including his debate performance here in Cleveland 3 years ago. But really, the president, Senator Portman, and others have to talk about a lot of the things I talked about today. How trade is an integral part of the future of your state and our country. We have to get over this obsession with exporting being the way you score and allowing as few imports as possible. We need to talk about the benefits of imports, of foreign investment, and the role that plays. I don't know if we need an ombudsman. I mean, we've got a Secretary of Commerce who presumably should be in favor of commerce, international and domestic. Yeah, I sometimes call it the Department of Anti-Commerce. We got the U.S. Trade Representative, who should be good at talking about trade, and some of them have been quite good, including now Senator Portman. I think he served affably. I've met Ambassador Kirk a couple of times, and he's a very nice, personable man. He could say a few more Cato-esque things about trade. So you're right. There's a problem there. There's a disconnect. It's easy for the politicians, not just platitude, but demagoguery on this issue. So I don't have an easy answer there. Just Cato stuff needs to be more widely spread. and I'm doing my best on that front.
I appreciate you presenting such a positive view of both sides of trade. I had two questions. One, you mentioned the fact that manufacturing is coming back, but productivity leads to gains. I'd like you to give us any data you have on whether individual worker salaries have improved during this, say, 20-year period, the last 20 years on that. Because I think besides losing jobs, people have the impression that the payroll has gone down or the benefits have gone down. Secondly, you mentioned that fair trade gets defined different ways by different people. Well, I think free trade does, so I'd like you to give me your definition of free trade that you use and what you think free trade agreements will be or
Yes.
should be.
Yeah. It is a lively question whether individual American workers are better off than they were, say, 10 or 20 years ago. I think the shorter term, the less well off we look. I mean, we're coming out of the steepest recession since the Great Depression. Incomes have taken a hit across the board. It doesn't feel very good now, does it? And it sounds a little ridiculous to say we're all better off because of trade coming out of a recession. But one of the things I try to do is stand back and look at longer term trends, 10, 20, 30 years. And if you look at say the 20-year trends, it's convenient to go back 20 years. That was before NAFTA, before the World Trade Organization, a different era. We are, I think, by just about any measure, the typical American worker is better off. Median household income's about $4,000 higher than it was then. Real median income, half above, half below. So it's not distorted by a few high incomes at the top. Something called, you hear a lot about real wages. I think that's an incomplete, somewhat misleading figure. If you talk about real compensation per hour of American workers, that's wages and benefits. And benefits have been growing as a share of our income, our compensation. That's how we pay for health care and retirement now. Real compensation per hour is still about 20% higher than it was back in the 1990s. So the typical American worker has benefited. And it's not all globalization, of course. It's technology and other factors in our economy. Has it kept up with productivity? No, but of course, capital shares in some of productivity's gains. It's the businesses that have provided the machinery and some of that. And then this will be controversial, and maybe some people in the room may not appreciate this, but there are some industries that are more heavily unionized. And let's face it, if wages are above productivity or above what the market can bear, there needs to be some downward adjustment. And that's happened. Is that a fault of globalization? I'd say no. Is it the economy sort of getting itself more in line with the realities of global competition? I would say yes. So trade isn't the whole story, but it's part of a story of American families over time being better off. There's still things we can do to screw it up. We've got a tax system that's an embarrassment. We've got regulations that are stifling growth. We've got this debt hanging over us and our children. And it isn't just the fiscal debt. It's the unfunded liabilities of Medicare and Medicaid. I'm getting depressed with all these problems. I think there's somebody else's issues at Cato. But my point is, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, but I think trade is part of the solution. A quick definition of free trade. Free trade is the ability of people to trade goods and services across borders without the interference of the government. And I think the closer we get to that ideal, the better off we are. If somebody once asked me, if you could put your sentiment on a bumper sticker, what would it be? And that's a kind of a challenging question to somebody who writes 8,000-word studies and wrote a 60,000-word book. But it would be, free trade is fair trade.
Okay, I just want to make sure we walk out here in one piece. We are Taiwanese, we are not Chinese. So if you have anything against Chinese, don't against us. No, I have a question. It's kind of like, I think I came here to Cleveland in 1989, and I think there's a lot of things at that time, things has been changed. And we talk about the trade, even it's exporting. I think American has the best customer service in the United States, but you don't have the best customer service in globally. And I think a lot of time, like Taiwan, we always listen to what U.S. says, because if we don't do, kind of like if we don't do what U.S. government wants us to do, then you don't protect us from China, something like that. So a lot of time that I think that things has been changed, and the rules, kind of like the game rules are changed. So I just wondering that is there anybody kind of like trying to, any kind of program or anything, trying to help the U.S. companies to understand what foreigner or other country what really need?
Yes.
I mean, for city of Cleveland, do you know what's the need of a city of Taipei or Taichung? I think there's a lot of things that government, they can put a lot of things in place for everybody, but sometimes I think U.S. kind of in the U.S. company might need to kind of stand up and then to reach out by yourself. But to do that, first thing you need to understand what really other countries needs. And I don't know, because I haven't heard a lot of things like that. Everybody goes only talking about, well, what can you do for me so I can easy for me to sell my stuff. But I think something need to be think about. So I just want to make some comment and also have a question to where have that kind of program.
Yes. Well, it's not my role in the grand scheme of things to advise particular companies of how to sell more in Taiwan or elsewhere. My interest is in getting the policies right so that government's not making it more difficult than it needs to be. You know, the Commerce Department does have its commercial service, and that's there, and I won't pan it today. But there is a whole private sector of assistance. There's the American Chambers of Commerce abroad. There are the World Trade Centers here in the United States. There are state government offices. I was just in Utah recently, and they've got a very aggressive effort in Utah to tap into global markets. There are, you know, private consultants, right, Randy? Ready to help people sell more effectively into global markets. So it's there. I would just say I sense my time is drawing near.
Your time has drawn near.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just mention I'll be out there to sign books.
He will be outside signing books on your way out, please, as well. Today at the City Club, we have been listening to Daniel Griswold, Director of the Center for Trade Policy Studies at the Cato Institute and author. Thank you for Mr. Griswold's attendance, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending this event. Again, Dan will be outside signing, and feel free to ask him more questions. Thank you.